Hi, everybody. Welcome. I think this is my 358th video. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but the screen just jumped so
Oh,
that now, at least from what I can see, you can only see my lips. But
okay.
can you see my whole face?
I see your whole face, so that's what's important. What you see,
Well, if you see it, that's good. I
yeah, I
can't.
see it, and therefore the camera's getting it. So let's.
I don't
So,
care.
we got to get this technical stuff done with. But anyway, this is such a special, unique interview for me. It's my 358th. I've been doing this almost 4 years. I was telling Janet, it's almost my 4 year anniversary, and I've done 358. A lot of these have been global, but this is so unique. And I'm with Janet Sternberg, who's a philosopher, artist, photographer, world traveler, so unique and so different. And she's have so many books that she's written, photography books. We're going to talk about looking at Mexico. Mexico Looks Back, which is the main purpose of this. This is her new photographic book that came out, and I've got some samples to show you all because I'm so thrilled about this. Uh, um, and we some of our journeys are certainly not similar, but some of the journeys, we kind of grew up at the same period of time with folk music and this and that in the 60s. And but Janet's life is just so outstanding. And she's out in Los Angeles and also has a dual home in Mexico. She lives in Little Tokyo. So I know all my stuff, Janet, out in Los Angeles. So there's so much to talk about. I'm going to trim down my Johnny Carson monologue, and I'm going to introduce Janet Sternberg. How about a little background, a little bio, and then we'll kind of jump into some stuff about your life and leading up to some of the work that you've done, because I have all kinds of pages and things to show. It's like show and tell. We're back in kindergarten. So take it away, Janet. Little intro.
Well, first of all, thank you. You obviously do wonderful work, and I'm really happy to be part of it. Thank you. You do wonderful work. I'm really happy to be part of it. So my background, um, background is one of these funny things. I used to have this image. If we could all walk around with a little computer around our necks, like they used to have sandwich boards many years ago, and on it would be our bio, because at a certain point of life, one has done a lot. And so the point is, where do I begin? I think I will begin in Boston, where I grew up, which was not my natural habitat, in the sense that well, I wanted something different, about which more in a minute. That said, I've written two books that are set in Boston. So it's interesting, isn't it? How something that is not necessarily the place where you are happy is a place where you can get creative vision from. But when I first went off to college, I went to the college that gave me the biggest scholarship, because I come from a family of very modest means. And I ultimately had this sense it was in the country, and I didn't want to be in the country. I wanted to be in the city. To cut to the chase, with a suitcase in hand, on a bus, I went to New York. And that was the place for me at a time when it was, well, everyone thinks their own time is special. I think this was a remarkably fervent time. I went to college at night and worked during the day, but the college I went to was the new, it's now called School University, and it was a place for a very large part filled with interesting people, radical people, many refugees who had come from Hitler's Germany and found a home there. So all of the teaching was untraditional, and so was I, and that was great. I lived in New York for many years, I decided at a certain point that I was not going to write. I had gone to college on a writing scholarship. I had won writing awards when I was younger. I just said, no, 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 not going to do it anymore. But I had gone to see just wonderful movies that were coming into the United States at that point. I thought, gee, I'll see if I can get a job working at film. And to give your listeners a sense, this is a while ago. There weren't any film courses in New York then, which is kind of like, you don't believe me? Really and truly. But I did get a job, a good one. And then I got a better one. And it's the better one I want to mention, years in public television when it was national. Now it's carved up into individual regional stations. But in those national years, you could just do a lot of great things. I went to my then boss, Jack Vick, come across old tapes of the Chicano movement when it was in the grape fields with Cesar Chavez, looking for better conditions and using theater to do so. I said, if you give me X amount of money, I can't believe I did it, but I did. I would like to go to the West Coast and make a full-length documentary using this footage and
Wow.
using what's happened since. So I did do that. And around that time, and you will stop me if there's too much background, but around that time, it was also the beginning of the women's movement. And without, there are so many things to say about that, but I would say that my entrance point was with other writers, other friends, the first literary women's magazine called Afra. I was involved with that. And I should go back and say that the El Teatro Campesino film, I should go back. I'm going to go back. All right. So
Yes,
yeah.
yes, please.
Really, it was a feature-length documentary. It was shown at the Lincoln Center Film Festival. I was very young. It was a big deal. And I want to just take you to a very recent time. In LA, where I now live, there was a revival of one of the theater pieces that came out of El Teatro Campesino, and it was called Zoot Suit. It was the first Chicano work of art that was on Broadway, etc. Well, here's this revival. I don't know how many years later, a lot of years. There was after my husband and I left, we were walking down the stairs and I saw Luis Valdez, who was the genius behind all this, walking up the stairs. We had seen each other through the years, so we kind of hugged, and his wife was there and we hugged. They continued, but they were with a man who was probably in his 30s, and he turned around suddenly on the stairs and he said to me, are you the person who made that film, El Teatro Campesino? I said, yeah. He said, thank you. You gave my father back to me. I watched it almost every Sunday.
Wow.
And that's the story I wanted to tell. That's a
Wow.
big story, time, and of the reason you do things. You do them one does them for many reasons. I was thrilled with the theater they were doing, activist theater, very funny, very wise, very just marvelous, and all the things they did since. But that's a sort of, it's not an end to the story, but it's a circle of time that makes me happy to tell. So we're going to go
Wow.
back, if it's okay with you. I'm going on
Sure.
to the women's movement. And at a certain point, I realized that the conversations I was having with friends, some writers well known, and also with others, I left public television, so we're going back a step. But at that point, I became the director and was for 10 years of something called Writers in Performance at the Manhattan Theater Club in New York. And they were wonderful. They gave me leeway to do whatever I wanted there. And so it was readings, it was theater pieces based on literature. It was everything from One Night Susan Sontag The next night, something called Mujeres Comunes, an anthology of women who, etc. Can go on and on. I won't. But the conversations that I'm talking about bridged that time. And I thought, this is so terrific. I, I have, there has to be a book that encapsulates this, that gives that sense of both the braiding of the personal and the speculative. That was very much of that time. So I went to a bookstore again. We're back in New York, New Yorker bookstore on the Upper West Side, looked around, and there was no such book. And as I have been heard to say, I'm going to repeat myself, it's the truth. I began this book because I needed to read it. And what this book is, and its sequel, there were 2 volumes, the writer on her work. I commissioned essays by women. That's the first one. That's actually the 20th anniversary edition.
Ah,
And Norton published that with a new introduction by Julia Alvarez, the writer. And she wrote something that I'm going to say because people aren't going to believe it unless I have some bona fides behind me. She said, it was the first. I didn't know it was the first, but it was, of women talking about what it means and claiming a place of our own in the mansion of literature. That comes from a room of one's own, obviously. And I had done a film about Virginia Woolf when I was in public television. So I was very happy with that reference. And I worked with each of the writers, and all of them were from the United States because that's where the fervor was then. And I really wanted, again, that great of the personal and this how one carried, every ethnicity, every whatever.
okay.
The reason I'm mentioning all this is 10 years after that, Norton they wanted to be some you. Am I moving and freezing? Freezing.
Yes,
You're frozen.
you're frozen.
Am I
Now
back now?
you're unfrozen now. Okay.
Okay, I think I was with enthusiasm. I was moving around. Stop it, Janet. Stay still. That works better.
Okay.
Okay. Right, right. So if you are still with me, people, I'm still in New York. I'm having a very rich, profound experience. Just wonderful. The book 10 years after that was based on my feeling something else was happening. And this was, I asked and commissioned essays from women all over the world, from Mexico, from Elena Poniatowska, from Australia, Elizabeth Joly. And of course, you forget things right at that moment when you're trying to list them, but it was. So together, those 2, initially, I really hadn't wanted to do them. I thought, I really want to do other things with my life. But I proposed the first one and Norton took it. And I thought, this is a good thing to do. However, it changed my life. And to this day, I go places and someone will say, are you the same person? And then I'm tempted to say, well, no, my mother had twins and she gave us the same name, but I don't say that. It's a bit smart aleck. And yes, indeed, I am. So the book has followed me and I have followed it. And last year, a wonderful thing happened. All of my papers, the editing notes, the original essays, the financials, everything was acquired by the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas in Austin.
Wow.
And I know you don't do better than that. It's thrilling. It's just thrilling.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll just stop right there. However, you might have seen a through line. If any of you are through line inclined, I'll throw out one more piece. And that was another job after the Manhattan Theater Club, where I was the senior program officer at the New York Council for the Humanities. And all of these jobs, nobody makes a living doing the kind of writing, the literary writing that I do. And this was, I'm a practical woman. I needed health insurance. I needed all those things. But the through line is public television. Okay. Well, I'm not going to mention them all. It's New York. It is Manhattan Theater Club, New York Council for the Humanities. I'm forgetting things. But friends of mine have this joke about me that when the ship of New York goes down, I will be the last hand waving.
Yeah.
Surprise, I wasn't. I wasn't. Shall I go on or shall I stop? Because now we enter a new chapter.
Continue, because this is fascinating.
Oh,
No,
great. Okay.
absolutely continue. It's so fascinating, your journey.
Oh, well, that's just wonderful. I hope it is to others. I'm only getting a sense of it now. You do get older and you do see so much. I think I won't go into that more. I think I'll be banal if I do that, but it really is a phenomenon. Okay, so at that point, I was dating for many years after I'd been divorced before that. A wonderful guy who was a program officer also at the Rockefeller Foundation around the corner from where I worked. And we weren't sure what was going to happen, you after a divorce, etc. But one day he said, the most amazing thing has happened. I have been asked to be the president of California Institute of the Arts, which I knew of because every interesting proposal that crossed my desk at the Humanities Council had somebody involved. Every's an exaggeration, but it was always the really interesting, experimental, thoughtful, combining scholarship and the arts person was from Cal Arts.
Wow.
And at that point, I had had cancer. And I had learned firsthand how hard a city New York is to live in when you are going through chemotherapy and you have a full-time job, etc. And around that time, I stopped seeing the city. And seeing, as you will later hear, is so important to me. And so when Steve said that, I said, well, yeah, that sounds pretty nice. That sounds like a place for us. It's not like going out to the Dream Factory. It's like going out to the most interesting place I know of. It's where the synthesizer was. I won't go through all the CalArt stuff. I just loved it. And Steve was president for 29 years.
Wow. Wow.
I think there's, at this point, maybe I'm wrong, but the only other person as long a tenure, so to speak, not really literally tenure, might be at Bard College, but that's not to the point. It was very unusual. And I am going to stop and have a little bit of water. My throat is dry, and that
Go
will
right
give me
ahead.
a second to collect a thought. And here's the thought. When we said yes to what I thought was one, and we continue to think, one of the most interesting places in the world, it was going out of business. And we showed the financials to somebody who really knew about those things. They said, don't touch it with an 2-foot pole. And we did. And after 6 years of tremendous commitment, he was president, I was not, but I was also writing my books and several other books that we could talk about, Phantom Limb, White Matter during those years. Also, I wrote a play that was produced in Germany and New York. I mean, I'm a worker, as you can gather. I work, I like to work. And obviously you do too. But after those 6 years, when I was really at his side in many, many things with the trustees, with what decision making, etc., on New Year's Eve, 1994, we cleaned our glasses and we said, it's safe. The money had been raised. It was an endowment for the first time.
Wow.
In
Wow.
2 weeks later, the Northridge earthquake hit, and the school was destroyed. And we woke up with $40 million in debt. This
Ugh.
is not 1990 money. And the knowledge that were it to survive, it had to happen, it had to be rebuilt, and all the money raised essentially by September. This was January, September, because people were marvelous. People stayed around. Steve, husband, I'll keep calling him Steve from now on, found with his colleagues many sites throughout Los Angeles where we were able to set up different parts of the school, because CalArts is all the arts with an experimental leaning. And he found a place that was where they built the stealth bomber. It was like a college campus that
Wow.
Lockheed had shut down, and a trustee got us there for very little money. And they set up, I certainly didn't, and needed Steve, but that was where the film school
Wow.
was,
Wow.
in the in the place. It was unbelievable, and it worked. It worked. It worked. For those of you who are interested in such things, I could go back and tell you how the money was raised. It's quite a story. How the school was rebuilt. I mean, it's really a big story, and I've not written this story, and maybe I should sometime. I don't know. But it's also a way of explaining why we stayed so long. Because when you go through catastrophe, you become bonded, and when you prevail, you are more bonded. We had thought, oh, we'll be out there 5 or 6 years. No, 29 years.
Wow.
And in those years, so much happened. New programs, new ideas. I have been heard to say that that period of time, and there will be people who will differ from me, but it was a kind of happy valley. I would not want to be there now. It would be unhappy for all kinds of reasons, as all of higher education is now. We don't have to talk about that. And when I say it was Happy Valley, of course there were problems. I'd be an idiot to just pass over those. But there was a sense of shared purpose and shared commitment and community. So after the school was rebuilt, and we kind of sort of walked around for a year going, oh my God. Oh, oh, oh. The trustee said, you're very tired. Take time off. And here I'm coming to yet another turning point. We took 6 months. The first part, we went to Mendocino, if people know that, a beautiful little town with which we're still connected in very big ways up in Northern California. And then we went to Mexico. And it wasn't the first time for me, but in any case, I already knew I loved certain things about Mexico. But we rented a house. At first, I said to my husband, I don't want to be here. It's a town called San Miguel de Allende. There are too many gringos there. And it's true, there are a lot. We're part of that world to the extent we have friends there. We have Mexican friends. We live in the Mexico section of town because, reader, as they say, 28 years ago, at the end of that time, we bought a house. And our lives changed again.
Wow.
I think I'm going to carry this to one more date. It's a really important date. After the earthquake, I said to myself, if not now, when? And I sat down to write a book that I knew was in me that wanted to be written. That book is Phantom Limb, which I can tell you about if you want to ask
Yes.
me later.
Yes.
I'm going to continue. I'll continue on the through line until I get up to where I want to be. And at the end of writing Phantom Limb, and it was very beautifully published, I realized that because it was set in the past and the personal past to a certain extent, I wasn't seeing the world. I mean, just seeing, it was not. And at that point, a cousin of mine had moved to the same then town, now small city. And I went to his house and I said to myself, I'm going to give myself, what is the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say direction because it wasn't. But the idea was that I would walk without direction. I would walk suspended and I would see what happened. And one day, not immediately, because that would have been very phony, but I walked into town and I looked into a store window. It was jumbled, it was full of things, old things, new things. On its window, there was a hand painted sign. It said, "Thank you for looking." And on the other side of the door, it said, "Gracias por mirar." Thank you for looking in Spanish. And I just said to myself, I want to take a photograph. Obviously, I'd been in the visual world, whether it's the films I made or my deep interest in it all or Cal Arts. I mean, it wasn't like out of the complete blue, but it was enough that I certainly didn't have a camera. And I went to the town square, which again was not nearly as sophisticated as it is now. And the only thing that was available was a disposable camera, a throwaway, a single use. I went down to the window and I took a picture. And here is another pause point, because with that began my entire life in photography, my
Wow.
not only my life, but my adventures, my thinking about it, why the disposable came into a kind of philosophy for me, everything that has brought me to this moment.
Wow. From that visualization of that sign.
And it was in that window because it was not stuff really for sale. Some of it was, because obviously the store wouldn't survive, and as of now it hasn't. But it had kind of like a jumble of things that were side by side that had no reason to be there except they'd been there so long they did. Like a drawing of a cat who had a baton and was conducting an orchestra, or an old cigarette poster, or just stuff. But for me, quite eloquent stuff. I love
Wow.
objects. I
Wow.
love objects. And after I took the picture and I got it back, and I say that deliberately because I'm sure you remember when you had to wait because it was film and it came back. I saw that picture and it had two things in it that were of interest to me. One was that in the background, and the window, I might add, filled the entire frame. And I waited until somebody walked behind me and walked through a kind of disc of tin metal. And I took the picture then. So I was working with reflection, not with a person. But behind it looked, I said, I didn't take that. Top of a building behind me, there was a man on a roof hammering. And I realized that the disposable did not make distinctions. It did not have any depth of field. Isn't that great? I could make the world interpenetrate and be on one plane. And I mean, it just got so
Wow.
interesting.
Wow.
This, yeah, I now use digital, but that's another story. Anyway, so I took that photograph and I thought, gee, it's okay, but it's kind of pretty. I don't know, very self critical. I showed it to a friend when I came back. She said, you got something there. And to cut to the chase on that one, uh, that was acquired immediately by the USC Fisher Museum of Art. I mean, it was just bought, it's in their permanent collection.
Wow.
In the years that have followed, something happened, obviously a very steep learning curve, also the thrill of just, being in the world with a camera. Also, the world said yes. That's the big thing, the work, because it didn't look like anybody else's work. And that's a great gift, it just was. And things were intermingling, things were blurring, and I decided I loved blur. I loved a world that didn't have sharp boundaries, that there could be a porosity. I mean, it became quite a big deal. And that's, I had already done an enormous amount of traveling with and through Cal Arts. But then someone in Korea invited me to do an installation for the opening of an entire building. I won't go on. It was very heady. I had shows all over the world. In 2016, I had a book called Overspilling World.
Which is
And I love
this,
that title. That's
right?
that one. That's the cover. That's the one. That's the one. It's a German publisher because some Germans got enthusiastic about my work. And speaking of Germans, that's the one that has the foreword by the great film director Wim Wenders, who I did not know, but I sent him some work and he said, yeah, I can write about this. So, it was really, really exciting, and it remains so. Other books have appeared. There was one I did during COVID when I felt really impelled to go out into the street, which were empty. But I found myself taking photographs of Los Angeles, of empty streets, counterintuitive, I might add. But there were traces of human beings, a shirt somewhere that was left behind, whatever. I was also working on another book in which I put personal history together with essay, which was like Phantom Limb. I just kept going. And then, then my husband stepped down, and we could have kind of gone anywhere. We could have gone back to New York, whatever. And I got a somewhat nutty idea. There's a building I really liked in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. And we ended up getting an apartment here because I did not want to go into the world that is so familiar to me in Los Angeles of homes all by themselves that cost a whole lot of money, which we didn't have, and people living in splendid isolation, in effect, only able to move around with a car. Just didn't want it. And I wanted another culture. So on that one, Mexico, which I kept going back to because we had the home there, and to a lesser extent, Japan became touchstones for me. And then 2 years ago, we went to our Christmas vacation in Mexico, had the return ticket in hand. Steve, at that point, had become the founding director of the Thomas Mann House here in Los Angeles, but he could do a lot of that distance. We knew that things were spiking like crazy still in LA, COVID spikes. And I just said to him out of the top of my head, why are we going back? He said, I don't know, why are we going back? So we have lived in Mexico for several years, and that could bring me to the book if you want to go there.
Perfect. So you're living in Mexico for a few years, and we're here actually, you and I, thanks to Nanda Coriolis, we're here to talk about looking at Mexico. Mexico Looks Back, and this is your latest work. And I plunged into doing my research about it. This is the press piece that she sent me, but whatever I could glean. So talk about this and how this got put together, and then I have a couple of samples to show our audience that I took from the book, whatever I could get. There's this wonderful picture of a man painting, and the words high the hand is saying it's free floating, perhaps for balance, it's hard work to stay in this position. The patch that he's covering with paint is the red of Mexico, the red of energy, not blood. And again, this comes you know, I pulled that out. To me, it's so moving. And then there's another picture you'll talk about this too, about cactus. And now again, I'm not I love photography. This is, yeah, I stare at this because I think cactus are magnificent specimens because they endure. They endure the
Yes,
heat and they endure the climate, almost like we may have to do one day.
yes, quite.
So talk about the last segment here, uh, Janet. Talk about looking at Mexico. Mexico looks back, how this all came about, and your journey.
It is a story. The first year of the 2 years that we have been living here, there, I just was in love all over again with Mexico. I hadn't fallen out of love, but it was more so. And I just took a lot of photographs, and we did some traveling in Mexico. So it wasn't just, our small city. And I at one point thought, I have enough for a book. And I showed them to my publisher, Distance Verlag, based in Berlin, but an international art book publisher. Art books, art thinking, it's really very good. And they said, "Yeah, we really like these. We'll publish this book." And then I thought, I don't want
Oh,
to. I know, I don't want to. Because around that time, I was looking around and I was seeing books by often very good photographers. There's quite a lot of them, good artists, but they were essentially a gringo's look at Mexico. Now, I'm not talking way back when. I'm not talking about the early days when great American photographers went down there, and North American, whatever. I shouldn't even say North America, because Mexico is North America, but you get the point. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about recent years when it seemed to me there's a sort of implicit assumption that what I'm showing you is my Mexico. And I knew it wasn't my Mexico. I didn't want to do a gringa's book of how I see this country. So I put it aside. And this is the part that really is the story because it was just so wonderful. A man, Jose Alberto Romano Romero, no, yeah, the Rome part comes first. Romero Romano. I always have to
Romero
remember that.
Morano. Okay.
Yeah. Rome comes first in that. That's my mnemonic. He came to our house as a physical therapist. Very good man, about late 30s, very intelligent. We just really got along. And at that point, I had taken a little bedroom in the house and had sold the bed, had the walls covered with what we call sheetrock so that I could push pin inexpensive 8.5 by 11 sheet images on the wall. Got a big table. I set up a studio. And he would walk in and he would say things about the images. And they were always so interesting, so uncliched, so full of insight and poetry. And so last November, could it be? Boy, a lot has happened since then. Oof, no, it couldn't be. Well, I'm not going to question myself. Recent, let's just say
Okay.
recent.
That's fine.
We took a chance on one another. I said, "Would you collaborate with me on the texts for the book?" So that way it would be crossing the border. Me from the United States, even though I was living there, but from there, and he originally from Puebla, originally a Danzon instructor in Veracruz. I mean, deeply seeped in. And and I didn't know whether he'd come through, and he didn't know if I was some flake, I think is the word, maybe from the 60s. I don't know when that, but someone who wasn't going to come through. But we each and both did. And he had a full physical therapy practice. But when he was done for the day, he'd come over. I had gone to this great bakery in the center of town and got some very nice baked goods we both liked. I'd make coffee. I'd show him images and I would say, just pick something you might want to say something about. I did not record him. I don't know why it never occurred to me. I just computer typed everything in. And at a certain point, it was enough. But until that happened, I have to say it was one of the richer and deeper experiences of my life because we realized without realizing it, if you know what I mean, that we were doing a portrait of Mexico that didn't look like others. Mexicans see it and they get very excited about that because it's poetic. One of the things I love is when things are not absolutely clear, and by which I don't mean clear versus blur. I mean understandable. I love what is that quality? A sense of not knowing. And little by little, as we put this together, I mean, well, put together meaning making the texts, we saw that this really was very profoundly about Mexico. And do I have time to tell you a tiny story
Sure,
about the
you
first?
got all, you got, yes, yes.
This is nothing to do with the book. Several years before, I had seen something in a window that I really was intrigued by, a tienda, and they were like these golden ovals hanging from a rope. And they had like little tendrils coming out from them. And I didn't know what they were, took the picture, brought it home, and I noticed that somehow I had managed to capture this beautiful roundness, one in particular. And I started thinking about Cezanne, who I love, and his paintings of apples, where he could do the roundness better than anybody ever could. And that's as far as I got. I showed it to Alberto, who is Jose Alberto Romero Romano. And he said, "Oh, those are what my grandmother used to scrub me with when I was a little boy.
Wow.
They were scrubbing pads."
Wow.
He said, "All over Mexico, people use them. It connects Mexicans, and how initially they're very harsh, but then over time they become softer." And he just wrote this little, he didn't write, he spoke this almost little prose poem about how he can still feel what it was like on his skin.
Wow.
And I had a big vision then that it was not scrub pads and it was not Cezanne, it was both. It was both. You know what I'm saying? That you could have both this world.
Wow.
But the one that I chose was, that was the first image in the book. That is the first image in the book. And also at the very
I saw
end of
those.
the
I
book.
saw pictures of that.
Yeah. And then I bring them back at the end, not visually, but with a sense of coming full circle to an understanding that I wanted to pass on to others. I think at that point I said something like "you too," meaning the book is there for everybody. It is, I should add, completely bilingual. This was a commitment I made. And it's all in Mexican Spanish. And I had it translated into that by a poet, Anthony Seidman, here in Los Angeles, who is not himself Mexican, married to a Mexican, and translates a lot from Mexican work. It was just a beautiful thing to pull together.
Right.
I should add a little other thing in here, and this is why I'm so pleased to be doing this podcast. After it was over, well, forget the chronology. It was a terrible year. I lost my beloved standard poodle who had been with us for 12 years. My husband fell and broke his femur, had to have surgery in Mexico.
Right.
I was sick, and I'm not going to go on. Then the book came out, and I started to think, well, what am I going to do to publicize it? And I had a talk here in Los Angeles that went beautifully. And the next day, my husband went to our doctor here of many years and learned that he had a very serious infection in his leg from the surgery. So you were talking to someone, he just on the 4th of July came home. He was in the hospital for 2 months.
Oy,
He had to have 3 surgeries.
oy.
I know. And he had 8 weeks on intravenous antibiotics. And everything stopped. The only thing that had to happen was getting through this, doing the right things for him, driving a lot of driving to where he was, falling asleep at night. I did not publicize it at all. Nanda was marvelous. This is Coriolis, folks. This is a big plug for a Los Angeles book
Yes.
publishing firm. And she kept it alive. She sent things out. I kept trying to do what I could. But July 6th, I think, after Steve had come home and we're here with fingers crossed that it will go well, I said, I missed all these opportunities that you had set up for me. Can we go back to any of them? And that's why I'm here.
Hey, there's a word with German origins, I think. It's called beschert.
No, that's fate. That is fate.
Fate.
And I
Yeah.
first heard it in Morocco. It's a word that traveled all across Northern Africa to Spain and then to
Wow.
Germany. It's a great, great word to share.
Beschert. It's meant to be. And listen, I live my life. It's funny, you talk about your husband falling down. I might as well plug this. There's a tortoise in my hair, a journey of spirit, my book, which but it's my spiritual journey. I'm convinced it's a long, involved, wonderful story of spirit and things that are beyond our comprehension. But it's there, and you get bits and pieces, and we're like antennas. If you open yourself up, you get and you receive. So I've had things that happen in my life that I call inexplicable. There are no explanations. I mean, in 1974, I was in a terrible accident. I was drag racing, Volkswagen, car rolled over 7 times, crushed, nothing left of the car. And I got up and I walked out, not a scratch. And
Oh my God.
yeah, yeah. And on January 21st of this year, my son and daughter-in-law and my 2 grandchildren, um, over here they are. I love my grandchildren. So anyway, they live a mile away. They came over to say hello. I was lying down upstairs, January 21st, and they called, Grandpa, come on down. So I took one step, big, steep, long staircase from the second floor. Yeah, I took one step, and I tripped and I went flying down 8 steps, flying down with such force that I hit a landing, and then I somersaulted down 4 more steps. So there are 12 steps, somersault. Uh, um, I should have broken a lot of things and I should have been killed, but I got up and I walked away. Yeah. Senator Joe Lieberman falls down and he passes away from that. But the point being, I wrote about it and I live it and breathe it. There are things. So somebody up there kept me together, held me
Well,
together.
I think there's not another way, a complementary way to think about it. And that is, I think I've had a wonderful life, a rich life, a good life, a life with trouble, the full whatever. The only not good for me has been health. And I'm not going to give you chapter and verse, but I will tell you at 7, I had rheumatic fever, and it goes on and on and on. It's in a funny way, and I mention this particularly for people for whom this may have been the case or will be the case. It was not a bad introduction to a life because you learn a resilience. You learn how to handle yourself when you're not well, how to read, how to think, how to be alone. But I still wouldn't wish it on anybody. But the simple point is that you were beschert, to use your word, to survive, and so was I. I
Yeah.
mean, when I tell people about, I say, would you like to hear the story of my right side and all the metal, all the, it's just, but here we are making and doing.
Yeah.
And there's a line I think I might like to end with, if you would like to. I really like this line. It's in my book, Phantom Limb. No one survives intact. In that democracy of sorrow lies our consolation.
Beautiful.
We've all been through it, and we all will be through it.
And that's a
And
great, wow, that's marvelous.
I'm really proud of that line. I just, first of all, I love the sounds. No, all the O's, no one, democracy, sorrow, consolation. Because my first training, which I never think I mentioned, was as a poet. Training meaning I'm basically self-taught, but be that as it may. My first love is a much better way of putting it. But I've thought about that line again and again and again. And it's not as though one wants to be sorrowful, but it is a democratic human condition that things happen. And when they do, it is a consolation.
Yeah.
If you accept that you're a part of it.
Yep. And it happens to everybody. Nobody gets out. We're all on the same journey, and nobody gets out. And of course, along the way, I learned this wonderful word, gratitude, which I
Oh, yeah.
express
Yeah.
every day, 10 times a day, to the spirits in my world. The gratitude of being able to do the stuff I do, the gratitude of being able to meet you and spend this time together. Truly, this has been great stuff. You know what? It's a great place. That was a great quote, great place to kind of do a wrap. Janet, I would invite you to come back. We can sit and chat and do stuff and talk. There's a lot of things we didn't talk about, but we can. But I'm reminding everybody, looking at Mexico, Mexico looks back. And in the words of a fellow Californian from up north, he made some movies named Clint Eastwood. I'm paraphrasing him. You made my day.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. You too. I
You
do
made
want
my
to say a little something about the book, if I might.
Yes,
And I
please.
thought it was beside me. No, it's over in, no, it's.
Well, unappropriately, if that's a word, you just froze. Now you're back. Okay.
It's drop dead gorgeous. I know that. Okay, yeah, I started moving again. Okay. I probably should get up and get it and bring it back. Do you have time to see the
I
book?
have all the time, and I have.
Oh, no, I won't. It's freezing. Our time.
Okay.
Whatever, it's okay. What I also, I'm running low on battery. I'll just say that my other two books of photography are big books. This is bigger, and by that I don't mean coffee table, although it's been referred to as that. But I felt this was an important book, and I really work closely with the press and the designers. Back cover, that image continues, and then there's the title in Spanish. And the paper is drop dead gorgeous. The quality of the reproductions is, the way it's laid out. And even though you can look at it individually, it does inscribe a kind of arc.
Yeah.
If you start at the beginning, go all the way through, there are people like Alberto's son and what he believes about a certain image. It's quite rich. And I hope you'll get it. It's certainly on Amazon, God knows.
Uh,
It's certainly
I'm gonna
Yeah,
have the
it's
link. I'll have the link for
oh,
everybody
great,
to
great, great,
see.
great. It's also, I was just told yesterday, it's in quite a few university libraries. If anybody wants to recommend it, write a little blurb about it on Amazon, moving it forward in the world. And want that to happen now because it didn't for a couple of months, although some great reviews came in. And because, you know, I owe it to the book for it to have a life. Simple as that.
I know. By the way, I know what you just said, as an author, as an author and with a Kirkus star, had I not got the Kirkus star, I would have been done and I would have written it and have been done. But what you just said, Janet, is so profound. You owe it to the book, and I owe it to
It's
my
out
book.
there. It's out there. It's your
Yeah,
production, your creation, your child. It's not you. It's out there, and you have to be good to it.
right, exactly. And I feel the
You don't
same
have to
way.
rush. You just
So,
have to.
yep,
Okay.
I absolutely agree. I think it was Norman Mailer, who once said, when he finished writing a book, that writing a book, at least for a guy, for him anyway, was akin to his giving birth. He
I
did
don't
say
have children, but I do have a friend of mine wrote the other day, and he said, "Do you know you have 9 books out there?"
like 9 children.
I said, I had no idea, to be honest, because again, being self-critical, I think, I haven't done enough. I want to do more. Oh, I want more time. I want to do more. I want to do more. And part of that's just wonderful and creative, a
Yeah,
creative spur. With not realizing I had done all of these and bunches of other things too is a bit foolish. So my husband is always saying, realize what you do. Otherwise, you get it.
right,
But yeah, yeah,
right.
but yep. Okay,
So this has
over and
been
out.
actually, this time with you has been sumptuous.
Oh, what a beautiful word.
It's
Thank
a
you.
wonderful word. It has been sumptuous.
Lovely.
And I thank you. I'm going to stop recording. I'm inviting you to come back. I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to just do a 2-minute wrap. So stay right there. But thank you so much, Janet. This is
Thank
great,
you.
and I'll do my job to get this out there.
Wonderful.
But thank you
Wonderful.
so
Thank
much.
you.